Okay, welcome everybody to this latest in our series of Basis Technologies webinars on DevOps and test automation for SAP. Today we're going to be looking at building a business case for DevOps automation in SAP. So a slightly different topic than some of the more practical or technical things we normally look at, but definitely something that comes up a lot with the businesses that we engage with, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Just a little bit of webinar admin as always before we begin. Everybody is on mute for this call at the moment, but if you do have any questions during the session, we would encourage you to enter them into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get through as many of those as we can at the end. We're probably going to run for about 40 minutes today. We'll see how we go for time. As always, the session is being recorded, and we will send a link to that recording out to everybody who's registered, and we'll send that after the session within the next day or two. So if you don't see that and you would like to get hold of it, do by all means get in touch with us either through the website, or there'll be some details later on at the end of the presentation. So let's look at during today's topic. A couple of introductions first of all, because we have two speakers in the session today. We'll get to that in a second. Then we're going to briefly look at why we even need to be talking about business cases and where we stand in terms of setting up this question. And the main part of today's webinar, we're going to look at how we can make a case for DevOps, what kind of ways we can use to justify that and request the investment that we might need. We're going to look at a few other things to consider around building a business case more generally, some hints and tips that might hopefully help you in doing that. And then when we wrap things up, we're also going to consider a few examples of Basis Technologies customers who've adopted DevOps in SAP and the kind of outcomes that that has delivered for them that, you know, potentially could be the kind of thing that you could feed in to your own business case as you look to adopt DevOps. And then, as I've mentioned, we're going to look at some Q&A as time allows. So today's presenters, my name is Peter Yapsley. I'm the head of product marketing here at Basis Technologies. Any of you who've joined our webinars over the past couple of years will no doubt have heard my voice before, and I'll be taking us through the first part of today's presentation. But more importantly, I'm delighted to say I'm also joined by David Lees, our Chief Strategy Officer here at Basis. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Pete. Great to be here.
And David's going to take us through the main part of today's presentation. But before we do that, let's just have a familiar to Basis Technologies. Call will know very well who we are and what we do, but for those that don't, we create software automation that really changes the way our customers can run and manage their SAP ERP systems in particular. And we do that by enabling them to bring concepts like DevOps and continuous delivery into those SAP environments, and hence today's topic, talking about the business case for DevOps and SAP. So we have the most complete DevOps and test automation platform that is, very importantly, specifically engineered for SAP and for the unique architecture and technology of SAP, and that's something I'm going to touch on in just a moment. And we've got global offices serving a network of global brands, some of the biggest SAP users, as you can see on the screen here, but also some people with more modest estates who are still reaping the benefit of using automation in those environments. And getting a lot of value out of that. So offices in North America, Europe, and Australia serving the entire globe. So that's a very quick intro to Basis Technologies, part of the webinar. And before I hand over to David, as I've mentioned, we're going to do a little bit of a section on why we might even need to be thinking about creating a business case in DevOps for SAP. On what DevOps is, either in SAP or anywhere else. I'm not going to get into any kind of detail in this in today's webinar. Those of you that have visited our website will know that there's lots more material there. There are other webinar recordings, ebooks, many things that will dig into more detail around that. But just to set things up, in essence, DevOps is a way that lets us deliver software more quickly, more often in a more automated fashion. And the key thing is it's all about business value, and that's why this slide says DevOps supports enterprise transformation. So what DevOps is going to do is allow our businesses to be more agile, more adaptable, more responsive, and let them judge more quickly whether they're on the right track and whether what they're doing is working. So it's very much connected to the big picture, and it's about both IT transformation, but really about business transformation, which is very much on many people's minds at the moment with the turmoil and the situations that we're going through. So we're going to talk a bit more about that business context in a bit when I hand over to David. But it's an important thing to consider and bear in mind when you start off thinking about this process of making a case for DevOps. And I think it's also important to note, because this is not necessarily typical in SAP, that DevOps is very much happening in many places today. It's not ubiquitous, even outside of SAP. It's not everywhere, but it is something that is been proven for some time to deliver value for a lot of companies. And you can see some of the examples on the screen here, some fairly famous ones, which some of you may be familiar with. Also a couple of basis technologies customers in there, like Ericsson and Columbia, but all large successful organizations for whom DevOps is delivering value. And again, the fact that it's there and already working is something to consider when we think about framing this case. So DevOps is very much effective in supporting enterprise transformation, as I've said, but SAP may well have some catching up to do. SAP is very much a situation of a chasm with IT on one side and SAP on the other. It's a very common scenario in a lot of the organizations that we engage with, principally in many cases just because the tools and the processes that a lot of the rest of the IT will be using just don't work with that technical and architectural uniqueness that we have in SAP. So, most often we find when we're talking to companies who want to change the way they manage SAP that it isn't part of that great new DevOps approach yet, even if the rest of the organization is already getting a lot of benefit from DevOps. Best case, we might find that the SAP team knows what's going on, but they haven't figured out how to connect into it and how to adopt those ways of working. Worst case, and also common, they're just simply completely isolated, and they might even be acting as a bottleneck in what's a really effective DevOps-driven process otherwise, and they don't realize that fact. It's maybe unusual for that level of isolation, but it can happen. Overall, what that really means, and this is what today's webinar is all about and why we're doing it, is that bringing SAP into a DevOps workflow does require a bit of specific attention and a bit of specific thought. It's not a lift and shift directly from the rest of the organization. Support the adoption of DevOps in SAP and making a case for change. Why do we need one? Two blue boxes on the left, and really these are fairly obvious statements, but they bear stating. First of all, change is almost never free. You may have direct costs like licensing or training, obvious things. You might have indirect costs of many different types, but the fact that SAP is standing there on its own, needing some specific attention and specific thought, probably is going to mean that it also needs some kind of specific investment to get things going there as well. And that's particularly where we come to this business case idea. But second of all, and not to be neglected, I'm sure we're all aware of this, we've all experienced it. People are resistant to change. They like to keep doing what they've been doing, especially if they've been doing it for a long time. And DevOps and the automation that goes with it is definitely going to change the way that people work. So we've got to convince people that change is worthwhile and that it's important enough to spend money on. And a business case is one of the tools that's going to help you do that. So, as we can see on the screen here, an effective case is going to demonstrate that the benefits of DevOps far outweigh the costs. And it's going to also, hopefully in the best scenarios, help you to articulate a compelling case for change, maybe beyond the financials or some facts and figures. And that's going to enable you to, of course, most importantly, secure the financial investment you need, but may also be a tool that can help you to convince other people to support what you're proposing and bring them with you. So it can be more than just a numbers document. So before we move on, also, I just want to touch on the topic of scope. Took a little bit of time to appear on the screen here, but we're there now. And what it might be that you need to actually ask for when it comes to DevOps for SAP. I would say most often in the organizations we work with, the case for DevOps has already been made somewhere in the IT organization. But as I've said, what we tend to see is that kind of chasm, that isolation of SAP. And so a separate case needs to be made, but it might just be for the specific automation technology, for example, that's required to enable that new approach in SAP, because the organization gets it. They know what DevOps is all about. In some other cases, some of you will need to look at the bigger picture. You'll need to sell a bit more in. You might need to look at more than just automation. So for example, you might be thinking about, I mentioned training, what's the training cost to bring everyone up to speed, and do you need to budget for that? Do you need to think about how productivity might be impacted during the transition? Are there any other teams that need to be supported? Like, is the support team ready for a massive increase in SAP deployment cadence, for example? Exactly what you're going to need in your business case in that bigger picture scenario is obviously absolutely dependent on where your business is and your specific situation. And the reality is probably somewhere between the two. You're going to need the automation technology. That's an underlying enabler that is required really to make DevOps function. And you may need to invest in some of those other elements as well, depending on the approach that your organization wants to take. The real point here, I guess, is that although this is a very important thing to consider, and you want to be thinking about this from the outset, what David's going to take us through in the main part of the presentation is going to be applicable really whether you've got the narrow scope in terms of automation or a bigger scope in trying to sell in DevOps more as a concept and the support overall that's needed there, because they're two parts of the same thing. So the important point is to consider this, but still many of the arguments and things we're going to look at are going to apply either way, whatever your scope may be. You just want to think about that before you start. There's clearly ways in which a business case can help and why it might be important, and we need to think about what the scope of that is going to be in terms of what we ask for. Why then do we need a webinar about actually putting that together? Well, number of reasons. As I've said when I introduced this, it's something that we often talk about in terms with our customers in terms of how to support the case they want to make for change. Some of the reasons you can see on the screen here of why that can be difficult and why we might need a structured way to approach it. So, for example, I'm sure we've all had experience of when the business just doesn't feel the pain of the technical challenges. They get what they needed when they expected it. They don't know how many hours and how much effort and how much blood, sweat and tears went into that in the back end. Writing business cases is not something most of us do every day. It's not a core IT skill particularly, so we don't necessarily have a lot of experience and practice at doing it well. And I think importantly in this case as well, the people who are effectively signing the checks, who control the budgets, don't necessarily understand the language of SAP. It's not necessarily something they're familiar with, even if they have a good level of basic technical understanding. And so we've got to think about how we can put the case in terms they understand, and that's not necessarily always simple or straightforward. So given those kind of factors and the conversations we have, we wanted to offer some help and advice on this topic based on our experience with the customers we've worked with and how they've tended to approach this topic of building a business case and what's worked for them. And what I'd like to do is hand over to David to take us through that main section of the presentation. So David, over to you.
Great, thanks Pete. All right, well, I'm delighted to be here to kind of talk through some of this. Prior to joining Basis, I was in Procter & Gamble for approximately 20 years, so I've had the dubious pleasure of creating many business cases in my career, and wanted to walk through hopefully some useful tips and takeaways that you can leverage as you explore your own journey towards DevOps for SAP. So let's dive in. There's really two sections to the presentation. The first is specifically focused on making the case for DevOps in the SAP domain, and then a second, smaller or shorter section will look at some other general tips and tactics about creating and selling in a business case. So for that first section, we're going to look at five different areas. One is really thinking of the goal in business terms. Secondly, really understanding there's many ways to look at DevOps and many potential value drivers in DevOps, but what's the right framing for your business? Third is really around setting the scene, then understanding and trying to define what you can expect, what your benefits are likely to be, and lastly, how you can best support your case. So let's dive straight in with the first one. And here, I think there's always a risk in an IT setting to start with the solution rather than the problem. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that old adage. So I think here it's important to really go from the business need perspective first and really try and work from left to right. What is it that your business, and again, Pete's mentioned this, and I'm sure we'll mention it again, every business case is going to be different because of what you're looking to achieve, what is important to you, what are the business priorities and strategies that IT needs to be able to support. But it's important to try and identify one or two of those key business imperatives that you are looking to leverage DevOps for SAP as a way to enable, unleash, or to remove bottlenecks in order to support. So let's take an example. Let's say you're operating within a market that is facing digital disruption, new competitors are moving in, and as a result, you need to be able to operate and to change your e-commerce, your go-to-market much more rapidly than you are able to today. And there are key dependencies between your e-commerce system and your SAP backend that mean you are unable to change at the pace that the business requires. Taking that one step further, as we move to the next slide, using that starting point, can I go through a why analysis? So why do we have a lack of agility within the SAP domain? And in this example, there is a reliance on manual processes, meaning that in order to still guarantee safety, to minimize risk, there is manual work that slows down that process. And one of the key findings, or one of the key ways in which that could be addressed, would be to automate parts of that process in order to increase the SAP deployment frequency without increasing the risk, or if anything, at the same time as reducing the risk. Now, we still haven't talked about a solution. We're still talking really about what needs to be true. And hopefully you are able to identify a business goal and do that why analysis that really helps you uncover what are the areas in your existing operation that need to be improved in order to support that business goal or strategy. As we move to the next stage, choosing the right framing, there are many different potential improvement areas that DevOps can provide. And obviously businesses and individuals care about different things. The focus for your business case will be those topics which are most relevant or which resonate the most within your business. And we're going to walk through a few examples. So the next slide highlights some of these groupings of benefits, and there are a number of quotes on this slide that come from some of our customers and from some of our case studies. But let's do a double click on a few of these. The first one is around speed and agility. DevOps has a very strong focus on automation. It has a very strong focus on shifting left. And by shifting left, that means being able to identify and eliminate defects earlier within the development lifecycle. So finding defects in development rather than in QA, finding defects in QA rather than in production. And by really being able to automate more of the analysis, by being able to automate more of the regression testing, you are able to accelerate the pace at which you can move your change through your pipeline. But equally, you're able to think about breaking down your change into smaller buckets. So rather than the age-old kind of annual or 6-monthly release cadence that waterfall brings into the SAP world, what if you are able to do that release monthly or weekly, or in some cases we have customers being able to do that daily into their production systems. The second framing could be focused around cost and value. At the minute, there's obviously a very strong focus around cost elimination, efficiency, driving more productivity so that people are working on higher value, more productive work. And so again, by automating those activities that today are highly manual intensive, or that simply delay the speed at which change is able to move through your pipeline, by being able to increase your cycle time through automation, be it automation of approvals, automation of deployment, automation of checks, you can drive out cost and deliver at the same time value from your investment, which the business case is looking to frame. The third one may be around integration. You're probably in an enterprise that has more than just SAP as a kind of a technology estate. You probably have enterprise applications that are used across all of your architecture, all of your applications, such as your ITSM tooling, such as your requirements and backlog management, in some cases such as your end-to-end functional testing suites. And again, a lot of time can be lost and a lot of errors can be introduced when you are trying to synchronize or align data between these types of systems of record. So part of your framing could focus on integration as a way of eliminating manual work, as a way of driving standardization of process, and as a way of really being able to bring together the non-SAP with the SAP world. Also from an orchestration standpoint, we have some customers where we integrate some of our tooling with the likes of Jenkins or GitLab to be able to coordinate deployment of change across a non-SAP and across an SAP estate. And I think it's important to really pick 1, 2, maybe 3 max of these DevOps kind of benefit categories to really drive those that have, as mentioned, the largest impact, the largest relevance within your organization, and really look to build the business case around some of these key themes. As we move to the third stage within the framing, it's really around setting the scene, and setting the scene in terms of where do we stand today? What is our baseline? And here it really depends on to what extent you are currently measuring your KPIs within the SAP space. Do you have a good handle on your deployment frequency, your transport volumes, your cycle times, deployment failures, your rework rates? Again, it's not important to try to fill out all of these. It's important to select those which have the kind of strongest correlation with the framing and the business goal that you are focusing your business case on. In some cases, you may not be starting out with a lot of transparency and a lot of access to this type of data, but I think it's important to pick one or two of these and to try to measure where you are today, because as we'll get into next, it's important to be able to try and forecast where you expect the investment this business case is requesting will be able to get you. So as we move then to the fourth stage, what is it that you would expect will be the outcome of your recommendation? It's important here that you go beyond the technical, and there's really four categories of benefits that we'll walk through in detail, that as you go kind of down that scale from observable, measurable, quantifiable to financial, they get stronger. Now that doesn't mean it's not worth trying to identify some in those earlier categories, but if you are lacking anything financial or quantifiable, then I think the business case will certainly be weaker. It's also worth thinking about trying to articulate what the cost of doing nothing looks like, especially given the expected trends within your industry segment and marketplace, that things are only going to get more challenging. The volume of change is likely to increase. The demand for shorter release cycles is likely to continue to reduce. The tolerance to outages is going to continue to drop as systems become more and more business critical and more integrated into the business processes. And so the business case can also highlight what doing nothing could mean, or at what stage this really becomes a bigger issue to the business. So as we look through these different measure types, we'll start off with the observable type. These are typically defined as soft benefits, which are recognized and can be articulated, but can't be converted into something measurable. It can't be converted into something numeric. So you can talk about strategic alignment, you can talk about team collaboration, job satisfaction, but it's something that, unless you have a specific measure or process in place, is unlikely to be something you can quantify today, but could be part of how you articulate some of the value or some of the benefit. Going up to the next type of benefit, we have measurable. This is something that you can quantify, but that cannot be easily forecast in terms of by how much you would expect this to improve as a result of making this change. So you know that by being able to release changes faster into your SAP landscape, hence your e-commerce system, your business will become more competitive. You may be able to target increased market share, but it's difficult to quantify by how much market share you would increase with the interventions you are proposing. Similarly, things like user satisfaction or customer satisfaction are generally have a positive correlation, and you may have a numeric measure of what they look like today, but again, it may be hard to forecast by how much they would increase as a result of your investment. The third type of benefit is those that are quantifiable, and really this means that you have a value, but also you have a way of predicting or forecasting by how much you expect this to improve. Here you can look at data both externally from SAP. There's a very good report produced annually around the state of DevOps that gives a lot of useful benchmarking information around what elite performers and various categories of companies, depending upon their maturity on the DevOps journey, what type of benefits they typically see in comparison to the other companies in the survey baseline. And some of the results here are quite astonishing in terms of the speed improvements that are measured, the failure reduction rates that are measured, and this type of thing. Now, more specifically to the SAP space, if we move to the next slide, it's important to really look at what this could mean for you. Here are some of our data points that we have from customers, and we have case studies to kind of back this up from referenceable data points. But really, you're looking at things like efficiency, elimination of manual effort. You're looking at innovation and cycle time improvements, very high orders of magnitude, huge amounts of risk reduction. And again, these are some areas where, with the use of case studies or with the use of really the knowledge of consultants who've been doing this for multiple customers, will really help you in being able to flesh out and forecast by how much you could expect improvements to be in your particular case, depending upon your come from state. Now, finally, the holy grail, and certainly where your CFO would be kind of looking, is the financial benefits of DevOps. So how do you translate or convert some of these quantifiable improvements into cost reduction, rework elimination, cost of outages reduction, so that at the end you're able to convert these into a financial return on investment, net present value. Again, it depends a little bit on what your organization typically uses. We have an ROI calculator and more detailed business case tools that can help. But if you want to get started, there's a very high level one available on our website to give you some indicative starting points as to what those improvements could be. If we move to the next slide, we get to really the fifth and final stage of this kind of core DevOps for SAP part of the webinar, and that's really to look at how you can support your case. What other data points can you take from the market So for example, the report that I referenced, what type of benchmarks can you draw from? Here there was a great article recently in Forbes talking about how there is a kind of very strong correlation between those leadership teams, that C-suite that is embracing agile versus those that are not, and how that reflects itself in stock price performance through value delivery. And obviously we have a number of case studies that are available on our website that can help provide some meaningful context and examples from other customers. You may have internally within your organization DevOps champions that are outside of the SAP domain who can also come up with some detailed data points that are internally referenceable or verifiable. And equally, look to leverage your partners or your vendors to help in what is likely a journey that you would undertake, and how they can share data points and examples. So moving into the second stage, there's just four other areas to highlight that are worth considering. One is process, second is audience, third is structure, and finally objection handling. Process is really kind of how do you need to manage this within your organization? How comprehensive does your business case need to be? What process do you need to follow? Is there a particular template that you must use? And what is your organization most accustomed to in terms of the different financial options of representing your case? Is it return on investment, internal rate of return, net present value, payback, etc.? Secondly, it's worth looking to understand your key audience. Who is your overall sponsor or approver? What language will resonate with them? What do they care about? Who are your key stakeholders and influencers, and how might they be impacted? And is there an internal champion or sponsor who you could get on board to help you with the positioning of your business case? The third stage, or the third additional tip that isn't specific to the DevOps for SAP space, is really to look at how do you structure it. Again, maybe that's partly defined based on the template that you would use, but one option is to look at breaking it down into the strategic, economic, commercial, financial, and management case that answers different types of questions. Why is it needed? Is it value for money? Is it affordable? Is it viable? And is it achievable? Finally, it's worth spending some time up front in terms of objection handling. What are some of the typical questions or concerns that could come up, and how might you look to head them off at the pass, let's say? Fear of change or change management, or kind of loss of control, especially for people in the SAP domain who are less accustomed to some of the DevOps principles or ways of working. Spend some time thinking about a communication and training plan that would help you in managing that organizational change. Secondly, any areas around security concerns, architectural fit, partner stability, technical maturity. Spend time obviously on technical validation, talk to reference customers, and even propose as part of your recommendation how you would eat the elephant, how you would break that down, what would you start out with to pilot, and how might you kind of expand beyond a minimum viable product. Finally, from an affordability standpoint, just to reiterate, make sure you have a strong case with financial benefits that you can convert into an ROI or NPV, and remember to highlight the cost of doing nothing. So With that, I think I've reached the end of my section. I'll pass back over to Pete, and then obviously at the end we'll hopefully address any other questions that you have.
All right, thanks very much, David. So just a quick couple of minutes from me, as I promised at the start, mainly just to talk about a couple of examples which hopefully will bring to life what we've talked about in terms of what some of our customers have achieved with DevOps after they went through this kind of process. So again, just a little bit, the DevOps and test automation platform I mentioned at the very start of this presentation that Basis Technologies offers consists of really two main products. We've got Active Control, which is our change and release engine that deals with the DevOps automation side of things and transport management and analysis and visibility and communication and all that stuff. And Testimony, on the other hand, covers a very important area of regression testing, which David's already mentioned when talking about some of those framing devices around quality and speed. So these two products combine to form that platform, and the examples I'm going to talk about next are all actually coincidentally examples of users that are using Active Control and what they've got out of that in their DevOps scenarios. So because I think the important thing here is how they relate back to what David was talking about there in terms of that framing your DevOps business case and the particular drivers that might be most important and relevant to your business. And we have more detail about these on our website, so I'm not going to get into too much today, but just for example, beginning with Ericsson, very much a consideration around integration there. Integration was a big thing because what they were trying to do was build SAP into a cross-application CI/CD pipeline that was orchestrated by a product called GitLab. So everything was deployed synchronously at the right time in sequence from one central tool. And what they were also able to get by hooking Active Control and their SAP change process into that GitLab tool was full visibility of their end-to-end process, such that they could have an easy way to see when a particular business change was going to be ready because all relevant systems have been updated. So you can see some quite technical outcomes on the slide here, but the key point of view, the key aspect in terms of the business point of view was this orchestrated enterprise-wide CI/CD pipeline across 15 different applications, including SAP, and that's what their DevOps project was able to deliver at Ericsson, so that they could deliver more quickly in a more coordinated way to their customers. Then IPG Interpublic Group, very big advertising conglomerate. Slightly different scenario there because speed and agility and productivity, very much bigger angles really. IPG is an umbrella group that has, I think, something like 90 different advertising and marketing agencies that they serve as part of the overall business. And many of those are very much in the realm of digital marketing and undergoing digital transformation in a very dynamic market. And they needed to respond much more quickly to their internal customers. And that's really what their DevOps project was designed to do in SAP. And introducing Active Control and DevOps processes has let them do things like, for example, deploy 25 times more frequently to production, so weekly instead of biannually, and therefore obviously they can deliver things on a much more frequent basis to their internal clients and react to their requests much more quickly. And again, from a productivity point of view, we can see here they've released 2.5 full-time employees from the process of transport management and change delivery in SAP, and those people are now doing other work that adds more value to the business. So not just a cost saving, but actually a productivity increase that's delivering more business value. And again, then Vistaprint, a much more of an agile development focus across their organization. And it's interesting because this was a business-driven initiative to try and transform what was originally a technology startup into something that was more agile and less monolithic than the big organization it had become. And they've incorporated a lot of aspects of DevOps into that, including in their SAP team, in order to make that happen. So you can see things like agile backlog management that lets them reprioritize what the business needs much more effectively, daily production releases in their case, so very responsive to change. And DevOps has contributed, agile concepts have contributed to that 3 weeks concept to value that they've compressed from anywhere between 12 and 18 months in terms of getting an idea, having an idea, in getting it in front of customers, down now in some cases to 3 weeks. So again, very much this idea of business outcomes that DevOps and DevOps in SAP are helping to enable. So quick overview there. Just in the interest of time, as I say, there's more information on our website, or you can contact us if you're interested. David's already mentioned the ROI calculator. If you're interested in looking at a high level of how much DevOps in SAP could potentially save your organization, this is a great place to start. The value calculator on our website, some simple data to be filled in there that can give you an indicative idea of what we might be looking at in financial terms for some of those areas we've talked about. And different stuff as well. Slightly different from DevOps and the rest of the organization, and may well require dedicated investment. And a good business case is the internal sales pitch that's going to help you succeed with that and secure that funding, but also do more than that in terms of bringing people with you and making a compelling story that connects particularly to business outcomes, because that's really going to help you make the case for why this matters beyond a technical level. It's important, extremely helpful to use data where you can to demonstrate both where you are and how things could improve. And I think if anything has come out of this conversation is absolutely critical. It's about tailoring your case to your organization, what's high priority there, the audience you're speaking to, the internal process that you need to follow, and adapting some of those things we've talked about to fit what works where you are. But important to take away as well that DevOps is proven to succeed both in SAP and in other applications, and there is very much a case to be made based on what's already happened out there in the world. If you would like to know more about anything we've talked about any of our tools, about those customers we mentioned, do please get in touch. You can see some details on the screen here, or as I've mentioned, take a look at our website. We'll be sending a link to today's recording out to everyone who's registered, so you should receive that. And just before we wrap up today, we're just going to take a look at a couple of questions that have come in. We're a little bit over time, so we'll just take a couple and we'll try to cover any others offline. First one, David, is kind of an interesting one. I'm paraphrasing here, but is DevOps only helpful for people who are up and running on SAP, or can it help customers who are getting into SAP with their implementation and then getting started?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's applicable for both. If anything, if you're just starting on your journey from an SAP implementation standpoint, I'm sure many existing customers will be quite envious, because large customers that have been running on SAP for 5, 10, 15, 20 years have this history, this technical debt that they're trying to address, and they're also looking to undo or change a number of processes or beliefs or behaviors that have developed within the organization over that length of time. So I think we can help equally those customers that are looking to bring DevOps as a practice into SAP, as much as helping those customers that are on the very start of their journey make sure they are starting out from day one with the best practices, the tools, etc., that ensure they don't get to a similar state in the future.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree. I think that's very fair. Got another question here, which I'll answer just to repeat it quickly for everyone. Question is, how many of our customers are using DevOps with traditional ECC, or whether there are more of them on S/4HANA already? And the answer is really, it's very much a mix. We see a number of organizations who are persisting with their ECC environments for some time. They know they're not ready for S4 yet and are looking for ways to optimize that and to work in a better way. Some organizations are looking to get more tooling and rationalization in place to help them, knowing that they're going to make the move to S4. And then in other organizations, the move to S4 is very much a catalyst for saying, how can we do things better, and what practice tooling, ways of working can we implement that are going to help us to make the most of that investment. Now we've got a kind of an opportunity for a clean break, if you like, with the implementation of the new platform. And we have the whole range of those examples that I showed. Ericsson and IPG are running on ECC. Vistaprint began on ECC and have recently migrated to S4HANA. And from a conceptual point of view, in terms of the automation required and what DevOps can deliver, it really doesn't matter either way. It's going to give you value and deliver you benefit on either platform. We have customers on both. Just one or two more questions before we finish.
Sorry, Peter, I was just going to build on your answer slightly there. I think it's also worth considering that the tooling can actually help during the transformation between ECC and S4 that many people underestimate, both in terms of duration and complexity, in terms of things like dual maintenance. And secondly, S4 itself may drive a much higher frequency of upgrade, given the pace at which SAP is releasing new versions or feature packs for S4, that again may expose some constraints or bottlenecks within the existing organization. But certainly we are covering the full spectrum. I just wanted to add those two comments.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very important extra info there. Just a final question here, I think, just because we're slightly over time, and I think it's a relevant one in many of the conversations that I've been involved in, and that's, what should the customer do if they don't have that baseline data to start with? And I know for a lot of organizations, especially if they don't have automation in place already, that can be a bit of a challenge in a complex SAP environment. How can they address that?
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of the SAP change is driven by transport, so you can kind of look to get some quick and dirty data out of your dev and prod systems from the transport tables, the E070 tables, to give you an idea of change volume, of cycle time, as well as some extremes of kind of, are you deploying certain changes too quickly without the necessary approvals and checks, and are some changes taking 9, 12 or more months to kind of get from dev to prod. You may also have some information in your existing ITSM tool in terms of change management that you may be able to use as a kind of a pseudo benchmark between SAP and some of your other higher pace applications. And obviously that lack of transparency, that lack of ability to measure and to understand where you need to improve also highlights part of the problem. DevOps is very much built on kind of iterative cycles of rapid improvement, and by not knowing your key performance indicators, it's very difficult to drive those types of things. So it is also highlighting an underlying problem. Okay, great. Well, thanks very much. So then, thanks very much, David, for your input and presentation today. We're going to wrap it up there, but thank you to everybody who joined us. We would encourage you to take a look at our website and see if there are any future webinars that you're interested in. If so, do please sign up there. We typically run one every month, so plenty more to be going on with. In the meantime, thanks to everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.